started, and we will catch people up as they come into the webinar. So welcome everybody. It's such a pleasure to see names and faces from so many wonderful women, either forestry professionals or landowners or some combination of the two, as I am. My name is Emily Huff, and with an incredible team from the Forest Guild, Amanda Mahaffey and Leonora Pepper, we are running this webinar as kind of a follow-on from a recent publication called Women on the Land that a fantastic master's student at the University of Massachusetts, Olivia, wrote or co-wrote with myself and Paul Catanzaro, who runs forestry extension out of University of Massachusetts. So we will put a link to that publication in a resources doc that I'm about to share in the chat window, but it's also available when you registered and really all over the place. So please let us know if you can't find it. And the inspiration for that is mainly just the general concept that we as a Women Owning Woodlands national network are just trying to continue supporting women who own land and forestry professionals who work with landowners broadly. Connecting women also is a very important goal of the organization. So, and Amanda just put that in the chat window for you. So I am the moderator for this final webinar event. And as I said, my name's Emily. I'm an assistant professor at Michigan State University, where I specialize in human dimensions of forestry and have done quite a bit of research and extension on private landowners. So that's kind of my interest and excitement. And I've been involved in the National WOW Network for quite some time. So I will be monitoring the chat window and introducing our three fantastic speakers today, and hopefully answering any and all questions as they come, and then queuing them up for our speakers. So in the spirit of this being a network, I will introduce very briefly the speakers and sort of share how we have come to know each other in the forestry world, and then I'll let them describe what they do more specifically as part of their presentation. But the overall structure is that we have three forestry professionals who will speak for about 15 minutes each, and then a wonderful landowner who we've recruited to tell her story on this topic of planning and legacy for your woodlands. So our first speaker is Marla Markowski-Lindsay, and Marla is also out of University of Massachusetts. And Marla is a part of the Family Forest Research Center, which is a partnership between UMass and the Forest Service. Marla and I worked together when I worked for the Forest Service briefly in 2015. And I'm also from Western Massachusetts. So Marla and I are connected both kind of professionally and personally. And she's done some great research, which she's going to share with you today on planning for your woodlands. So take it away, Marla.
Thank you, Emily. I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody see that? Great.
Man.
Thank you, Emily. And hello, everybody. I am really excited to be here today to talk about the research that I've done over the past. It's funny, I was preparing this presentation and now I realize it's almost 10 years I've been doing this work, and time really flies. And my colleague, Paul Catanzaro, and I have worked on this together. He's the Extension Associate Professor and Co-Director of the FFRC at UMass. When we started this research, we wanted to find out anything that we could about legacy planning and family forest owners and estate planning in general. So today I'm going to talk a little bit, I'm going to give you a little broad overview of the process, and based on our research, what we've learned so far about landowners and legacy planning. So for this webinar, I want to stress that women are huge players in the legacy planning process. There's a really high percentage of women making legacy planning decisions, and that's pretty impressive. But also, women have been known to live longer than men, and so they will likely be owners longer. So it's great that you're here today to get some information to start or continue the process and network. So I see legacy planning as a three-part process. First is to set goals. Second is to gather information from friends, family, other landowners, from the WOW network, from professionals, lawyers, foresters, and then to formalize your plans. So in the research that Paul and I have done, what we wanted to find out was, what have people done to achieve their goals so far? So what legacy tools have they used to include their land? There really wasn't anything out there that gave us any information about that. And we also wanted to find out what people's goals actually were. And the reason why we were asking both of these questions is we wanted to know how we could help them with information and outreach, and whether there was a way that we could provide them, provide you with information that you need to satisfy your goals. There's a lot of different kinds of goals out there, and it's not a one size fits all situation, especially when it comes to legacy planning. And really, legacy planning boils down to two questions. Do you want to determine who will own the land next? And do you want to determine how the land will be used? If you want to determine who wants to own the land next, you might be thinking about issues of fairness with heirs. You might be thinking about, well, who's interested in owning the land next? And do they agree that what on sort of suggested plans? If you are interested in determining how the land is going to be used, there are a lot of other issues. Do you want to keep the land forested? Do you want it to subdivide some of it for heirs or all of it? Do you want to keep it permanently protected, temporarily protected? So these are the two main questions. And what I'd like to do now, I'm going to keep talking, but I'm going to ask you to put in the chat, do you want to determine ownership? Do you want to determine use? Do you want to do both, or do you want to do neither? So I'm going to keep talking. You can think about that and just type that in the chat. So what you want to do determines how you go about achieving that goal. So you want to ask yourself, do the ends justify the means? If your goal is ownership, there are some choices. You can put your wishes in a will. You could put the land in a trust, a limited liability corporation, or a corporation. If your goal is to control use, you might want to think something other than a will. You could put your wishes in a will, but there's no guarantee that that would happen. There are other programs, a lot of different choices, but those choices vary based on sort of the scales of controlling use. So a current use program, depending on what state you're in, could control use. You would be doing some forest management, controlling use for maybe a year. In Massachusetts, it's 10 years. You could put your land in an easement, which is a permanent controlling use permanently. You could donate your land or sell it to a conservation organization. So thinking about your goals and what you want to do, there are these different levels of controlling use and scales of controlling use. And some of these programs might fit you better than others. So back in 2015, we conducted a survey with family forest owners in 4 states in the Northeast: Maine, Vermont, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire. And we looked at 2 regions in each state. And the regions that we chose were watersheds that had creeping residential development. So they were sort of on this edge of residential development. They were mostly forested, but there was this threat of development. And we wanted to talk with folks there about what they were doing with planning their land. We talked to about, we didn't personally talk to them, but we sent them a survey about, there's around 500 landowners, about a third of them were women. And we asked them what legacy tools they had that included their land. And for this talk, I wanted to focus on what the women landowners said. And the female landowners had 44% of them had a will that included their land in some way. We don't really know what way. We just asked what tool they had used. 24% had a will and some other formal means to put to control their land in the future. And the majority of that 24% were put into a trust. So for all intents and purposes, a quarter of that sample had a will and a trust. And about a third of the sample didn't have any formalized plans yet. So we thought this was really interesting, but we didn't really know from this question what they wanted to do with their land and what their goals were. So in 2016, we conducted another survey to the same states and the same regions, but there were different people. So family forest owners in those 4 states and 2 regions in each state. And we asked them about their legacy objectives for the future of their land. In that survey, we talked to about 600 people, and again, about a third of them were women. And we asked them a series of legacy objective questions. And those questions allowed us to kind of group them into these categories. And what we found, and this was for all landowners, men and women, about a third of these landowners had legacy objectives related to future owners. So they were concerned about providing inheritance to heirs, treating their heirs fairly, giving the next owner a full range of options. About a third had what we're calling altruistic legacy objectives. So they were really interested in protecting the environment and wildlife and benefiting their community. And about 20% of these landowners wanted to achieve financial security for themselves or their heirs. These numbers don't add up to 100 because we couldn't categorize everybody this way. And I just want to say, some people may have chosen more, they may have checked a lot of these objectives, but this is where they predominantly answered, where they mostly tended to. So I thought it would be great to see how the women in our sample did. And what I found, what we see is that a lot more women had altruistic legacy objectives. I was really surprised by this. 37% compared to 30% wanted to protect the environment, wildlife, and benefit their community. And more women also wanted to achieve financial security for themselves and others, which makes perfect sense when you think about women living longer than men and wanting to make decisions that allow them to live comfortably into the future. So after asking that question, we wanted to dig a little more deeply into what exactly they wanted to do. And there's a lot of text on the screen, so I apologize for that. I just want to focus on these bottom few numbers. And what we found was that a lot of people were interested in designating the future use of their land. And almost half wanted to maintain forest cover, and almost 2/3 wanted to keep their land intact as a single property, so not subdivided. And if we look at the women landowners, again, we see lots more women wanting to designate future use of the land, almost 60%. And almost 60% didn't want commercial or residential development on their land. So lots of landowners, lots of women landowners want to do a lot of great things on their land, but we know they haven't taken action, not yet. About 30% from a previous slide hadn't yet made any plans for their land. So why is this process difficult? What is sort of stopping people from moving forward and moving ahead? And this is where, Leonora, I would like you to set up the poll. And what the poll is asking is, what difficulties are you currently encountering or have encountered when planning the future of your land? And you can click as many choices as are appropriate for you. And I'll give you, I don't know, half a minute. I don't know how long to give for a poll. I see the numbers still changing, so we'll wait a little bit longer. So this is great. Now, I don't know what happens if I click on my screen, if I'm going to lose the poll. Hopefully I won't. But what I see is lack of time, needing information, and you're here, and that's great. Family issues, the cost of the planning process. This is great. And I just want to compare this to what we found in our survey. Needing information came up as the biggest one. Lack of time, yes. And cost of the planning process, that was a big one. Fairness to heirs. So pretty similar to what we found. So this is really interesting. So like I said at the beginning, we really wanted to find out where people were at with this process so that we could help them. And Paul and others have developed some outreach resources based on this research to have available to people who need that information. And I just wanted to remind you that these resources are online. So a couple that came out of some of the research that we've done, protecting your legacy and using a will to pass on your land, are there, as is the resource that Emily and Paul and Olivia have done, Women on the Land. You can find that at masswoods.org. And then there's going to also be the Google Doc that will present that. And that is basically my talk for now. And I just wanted to thank you very much. I don't know if I needed to share these results so that you guys could see them, or Leonora or Emily.
I saw them.
You saw them. Okay, great.
And then we took them away again. There they
are.
are.
Okay. Oh, okay. And you took them away. Okay, great. And that's all I had for now. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marla. I didn't get to vote because I'm a co-host, but I would say for myself as a landowner, pretty much all of these things.
Yeah, I know. Well, it's really hard, right? Like so many of them are applicable at different times and for different reasons.
Yep. And I have a 9-month-old baby. So we've just started thinking even in those terms.
Right. And, and that's just one other thing to add, is that these barriers and decisions change as you go through these life events.
Indeed. All right, so feel free to add questions for Marla to the chat window. And I didn't give everyone sort of the Zoom overview. So if you're having any difficulties or issues with Zoom, feel free to unmute and let me know, and I can help guide you through that process. But we will answer all questions at the end of the 3 speakers, but that should not stop you from putting them in the chat window now, and we can kind of tee them up. But next up for you, we have Jennifer. And so the way I actually found the next 2 speakers, Jennifer and Jamie, was via another colleague of mine, Chris Tills, out of University of Wisconsin Extension. So that's another fantastic person and great resource on this particular topic. Chris has been coordinating a lot of different legacy and land planning efforts. And I can throw her contact information in that Google Doc as well. But that's how I found Jennifer. And Jennifer's the coordinator for a landowner education program at Virginia Tech Extension, among many other things. So Jennifer, I'll let you say hello and give your talk. You're on mute, my dear.
I have done this before, I promise. Hi, everybody. Happy to be here today. Thanks for the introduction, Emily. Part of my landowner education programming has revolved around this concept of legacy planning. And in Virginia, we have a separate legacy planning program called Generation Next. And this is a partnership between Virginia Tech and Virginia Cooperative Extension and our state forestry agency, the Virginia Department of Forestry. And our goal with Generation Next is to help landowners keep their land intact in forest and in family as it passes through the different generations. And so I'm going to talk about a component of that today. Back in 2018, we completed a study that identified the benefits and barriers to succession planning for woodland owners, so somewhat similar to what Marla just presented. And one barrier that came up for us as well was that there's concern about treating all of the heirs fairly. So I'm going to talk about the concept of fairness and the idea that splitting everything equally among your heirs automatically makes everything fair. And you can probably tell by my title that I don't believe that this is always the case. So when I was a kid at Christmas, my mother would always make certain that she spent the same amount of money on both my brother and me, and that each of us had the exact same number of gifts in our stockings and under the tree. And of course, occasionally this meant that one of us would end up opening several gifts that were not really gifts, like a box of tissues or 3 pairs of socks, each wrapped individually. But this was her attempt to be as equal as she could be in a situation where she couldn't give us exactly the same gifts. She gave us the same dollar value and the same number of gifts. So it was equal and I guess fair, maybe not to her because she had to wrap a lot of extra silly things, but as fair as she could be. So this is the approach that a lot of families take when it comes to distributing their assets, including their land. But is this really necessary? Does everything need to be equal in order to be fair? Or let me even flip that question and ask, is everything being completely equal always fair? So I'm not going to answer this true false question. I'm just going to leave that up there for you to think about as I go through this presentation. So you've probably seen this cartoon. It's made the rounds on social media over the past year or so. But what the left side shows is that by treating everyone equally or exactly the same, not everyone has the same outcome. In this example, equal does not mean fair. Everyone in this picture needs something different to achieve the same outcome or for it to be fair. And fair is when everybody gets what's appropriate for them to help them be successful. And the picture on the right demonstrates what this might look like. So sticking with the equal means fair approach, when this is applied to woodland succession, the result is often that land is divided into equal parcels, 1 parcel for each heir. So we end up subdividing larger forested parcels into smaller ones. So for example, a 100-acre parcel divided among 4 children becomes 4 25-acre parcels. And this continues on through generations until everyone ends up with a very small piece of land. And this parcelization of the landscape presents challenges for conservation. Smaller parcels are much more difficult to manage for forestry and wildlife. So as natural resource professionals, we are taught how to manage large, contiguous parcels of land. And it's relatively easy to manage 100 acres of contiguous woodland. We can use traditional forest management tools like timber harvesting, prescribed burning, and we can use hunting for management of wildlife. But in many cases, these tools can't be used safely or effectively on smaller parcels of land. And I'll show you an example of why in just a minute. But most concerning is that parcelization can lead to land use change. If your heirs cannot make money from their land through selling timber or selling hunting leases, and they can't afford to keep the property, they are much more likely to sell. And the buyers of this property are often people who can make money from it. In other words, usually developers. And so in these situations, we end up losing forest acreage. So here's a little visualization. This is from the Forest Service of how land use change occurs and the resulting challenges for natural resource managers that go along with that. So this begins as a large, contiguous, relatively easy to manage forest. But over time it becomes subdivided and not so easy to manage. These folks are purchasing their homes in this subdivision because they want to enjoy the woods in their backyards. So they have no interest in seeing that timber in these little pockets of forest that remain. They have no interest in seeing that timber harvested, let alone having logging equipment in their backyards and log trucks on their roads. Nor do they have any interest in having a prescribed fire used to manage those woods in their backyard. There's a lot of liability and risk associated with that in the subdivision. And certainly you can't safely hunt in the forest in this kind of area. So this type of landscape also can increase problems with non-native invasive species. There's much more forest edge, and so there's a lot more areas where non-native invasives tend to thrive. I'm sure all these people own dogs, and I own dogs. I love dogs, but they are notorious disseminators of non-native invasive species. And of course, domesticated animals can be really hard on wildlife populations. And also in situations like this, there's an increase in the number of negative human and wildlife interactions. So wildlife are run over on these roads, deer get into people's gardens, bears dig through people's trash. So a lot more negativity in association with wildlife. So this is just to say that these kind of developments are not ideal for conservation efforts. Okay, parcelization leads to challenges with conservation. Equal means fair is not always beneficial to your heirs either. So all of your heirs may not have the same attachment to the land. Some may live far away, some may hate being outside. So giving each heir a piece of land can present a challenge just because they're not interested, but it can also present a financial burden to some of them. So we all know that there are expenses associated with owning land. We have to pay annual property taxes, liability insurance, management expenses for maintaining roads and boundary lines, and just regular monitoring for trespassing and forest health issues. These things all cost money. And not all of your heirs may have the same financial resources available to them. And the final challenge is that equal means fair may not be fair to one heir in particular. Perhaps you have one heir who has a really strong attachment to the land and really wants to own it in the future, while some of your other heirs do not. So the heir who's interested in the property, they might feel resentful that the other children are getting the same thing that they are. They're all getting ownership in this property when really there's only one heir who's truly interested in owning and managing it. So challenges to conservation and challenges to your heirs. So what's the solution? Let me ask you to just consider that fairness isn't always about everything being equal. Fairness is more about leveling the playing field so that people get what they need when they need it. And oftentimes, in order to treat your heirs fairly, you have to treat them differently. So I'm going to share with you a short video clip. This is actually my personal story that has to do with equal versus fair. And just so you know,
So our goal of creating a place for our family to recreate and enjoy together is actually a way for us to achieve our ultimate goal for the property. And it's one that I haven't mentioned at this point. And that is passing the land on to the next generation. So when most families think about passing their land on to their heirs, they think about dividing it into equal parcels and giving each child the same number of acres. Okay, that's an equal distribution of the asset. Our property is under a conservation easement, however, which means that we have 0 subdivisions on the property. It must pass on to the next generation as an intact 70-acre parcel. We have 2 daughters, and so we see our options for passing the land on as we have 2 options, we think. One is to pass the land on as a whole parcel to both of them, making them co-owners. Of course, that means that both of them would have to make management decisions for the property together, and they would share in the financial burden of owning a property. So maintenance expenses, taxes, insurance. This is an equal way of distributing the property. They both get the same exact thing. However, in the case of our daughters, it's probably not a fair way to give them their inheritance. Our older daughter is a forester, and she is financially independent, and she lives out of state. Our younger daughter is a single mother of 2, and she is currently working her way through college, and she is not financially independent at this point. So it would be a big burden on her to have to come up with half the money for the insurance and taxes for this property every year. So it's equal. It's probably not fair. The other option we see would be unequal. We would pass our land on to our older daughter, and we would give our other daughter our other assets. So cars, personal possessions, make her the beneficiary of our life insurance policies. Not equal, they're not getting the same thing, but it's probably fair because they're both getting what they need at that time in their lives. Now, certainly the situation could change. Our younger daughter's situation could change when she gets out of college. And so legacy plan, our legacy plan, is a flexible document. It's something that we're going to revisit as our family changes, as our needs change. But it is a plan that we don't have it written down. It probably should be written down, but it is a plan that we've discussed and that we have in place for the time being. So I strongly encourage you all to have as one of your management goals a legacy plan if you want to keep your land in your family for the long term.
So that video was, it's actually part of a longer video about setting management goals and objectives. And I meant to put that into context before I went ahead and clicked play. But, my property is an example of one that can't be subdivided. So we can't do that. Everybody gets, 35 acres. That's not going to work. But we do still need to worry about being fair to our heirs. And so this is the current plan that we're working with. We will see if we need to adapt that as we go forward and our children get older. So what I wanted to accomplish with this short presentation is to encourage you to think about other ways that you can pass your land on to your heirs if an equal division of your land does not mean a fair division. So there's other ways to pass your land on to the next generation while keeping things fair. You may need to get creative, as my family is doing, and it may be more work, more challenging up front. But in the long run, this is necessary if you want to keep your land in forest and intact and in your family. So as a first step towards this process, I recommend writing down all of your family's assets. And there's many different worksheets available. What I'm showing here is a worksheet that we have in a legacy planning publication we recently printed for our Generation Next program. And your assets include your land, but they also include your bank accounts, cars, retirement savings, jewelry. And depending on your family dynamics, you may be able to just share this asset documentation with your heirs and ask them to identify what assets they're interested in. It may surprise you. And this may help start you on your way to perhaps an unequal, but hopefully a fair distribution of your assets. So if you're really interested in this overall topic of legacy planning, and I'm going to go ahead and make the assumption that you are since you're on this webinar today, I encourage you to go to the Landowner Education Program's YouTube channel. It's the Gen Next Legacy Planning that's up there under YouTube. We do have a series of videos on there with other landowners sharing their trials and their tribulations and their unique solutions to this legacy planning process.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Again, any questions you have for Jennifer, throw them in the chat window, and we will keep moving forward with our next professional speaker, Jamie Knack. And Jamie is from Wisconsin, and similarly found Jamie through another colleague, and now we're connected professionally. And Jamie's going to kind of conclude the professional series of 3, talking about tips to engage the next generation on your land. Take it away, Jamie.
Great, thank you, everybody, and thanks for the invitation to be part of this great group. So I've learned as I've gone along, and again, just really appreciate it. So I'm a little unique with the panel in that I'm actually a wildlife outreach specialist, which is an extension position. I have a wildlife degree. I'm a wildlife biologist by training. However, I work with private landowners who own woodlands, but their primary goal or one of their top goals is to manage for wildlife abundance and diversity. And so annually I host a landowner workshop or conferences around these topics. In the same boat, Chris Tiles, whose name was mentioned earlier, is a forestry extension natural resources educator, more an administrator now, but she oversees or does programming in Wisconsin for forest landowners, again, focusing on forest management. And together, each of us have realized that as much as we want folks to have a wildlife management plan or a forestry management plan, there is a real need for legacy planning, education, and outreach. And so together, her and I were able to work towards a new program in Wisconsin called Your Land, Your Legacy. We did it in person for 2 years. And over the COVID pandemic here, we've been working hard to make this program an online course and hope to debut that this fall. So enough about that. I want to switch to what I think is a very fun topic, but also a very important topic. And I'd like to start by inviting you to put in the chat, go ahead and type in the last thing you did on your property with a family member or a potential heir. And we'll take a look at those later. And then the reason I'm asking you that question is the future of your woodlands is likely directly related to the involvement and interest from the next generation or two. So this presentation is going to focus on things you can do now to help deepen your family's connection to the land and to increase the likelihood of the property staying in the family. And to the land program, which is curriculum that was developed by Clint Bentz out of Oregon State University. So some of the ideas are from that program. And then also my husband and I are both wildlife biologists. We own a small acreage out in the country, but most importantly, we want to make sure that our young daughters grow up with an appreciation for the outdoors and with a conservation mindset. And so some of these ideas that you're going to see and many of the pictures are from our own family's experiences. And before I move forward, two things I want to highlight with the title of this presentation. Landowners today are remaining active stewards of their properties well into their 70s and 80s, which means the next generation could include both adult children and grandchildren. And the second point is the capitalization of the word your. Making connections to the outdoors is fantastic. It's a great goal to have with your children and grandchildren. But for them to truly have the passion for a specific piece of land, memories need to be place-based. Let's see. I know I have a lot of large images, so it's a little sluggish. Moving forward. I don't know, Emily, it's not letting me advance. I could stop sharing and jump back in.
Yeah, I might want to try just resharing, and if that doesn't work, I can pull it up.
Okay, let's see what's going on here. Well, let's see. All right, hang on one more time here. I'm going to try this. Of course, everything went so smoothly in the test run, right?
I've got it ready if it's the third
Okay,
time.
let me just try one more time. Oh, there we go. Okay, sorry about that.
Yay.
Yay. So for those of you fortunate enough to own a woodland property, it's very easy to take for granted how rare this privilege really is. Today, less than 5% of the general population of the US own rural farm or forest land. Recreating, working, and perhaps living on your property has created a lifetime of memories and deep connections for you. Keep in mind, it will be difficult for the next generations to care as deeply as you do for your land unless they too have made personal connections, invested their time and sweat equity, and enjoyed the fruits of their labor. Helping the next generation create personal connections to the property should begin at an early age, but it's never too late to start. Share my camera again here. Okay, so first and foremost, share your passion. Talk to your family frequently about the property, the history, why you own it, what your dreams are for the property. Share stories of things that happened on the property itself and photographs of what it used to look like. Another idea I always like to share is if you have, again, children or grandchildren, but see what piece of the property really inspires them and find a way to name it after them. So whether that's Savannah's Oaks or Carter's Bluebird Trail, maybe it's a large oak tree that they get to name. Create signs and signage where they have these special places on the property. My goodness. Emily, I don't know if it's just so slow. That's why I turned my camera off.
Jamie, have you tried manually advancing on the little arrows that pop up sort of in the bottom left of the slide? Sometimes that can.
Yeah, I don't even see that actually.
Well, PowerPoint is giving us trouble. I think there's some really cool comments in the chat. Emily, I don't know if you want to highlight any of them. Oh, and there it goes.
It did just go. It might just be that sluggish today. I don't know. So another point here is to involve family members in the decision-making process. Give them some responsibilities such as exploring cost share programs, consulting with a forester or a wildlife professional, setting up the next timber sale. Family members are going to be more supportive of decisions that they've been involved in making. It's also a chance for the next generation to gradually learn what is involved in managing and owning the property instead of being overwhelmed by a sudden transfer of ownership. And the next slide describes some of the things that you can teach your children and grandchildren. So again, teach them some of these skills so they have that knowledge and that experience before they receive the property. Host annual or regular family gatherings. So again, creating some strong annual traditions, whether it's a work party or a camping trip, and try to visit the property through all the seasons. Work as a family to come up with a project each year. Maybe it's tree planting, maybe it's removing invasive species, or splitting and hauling firewood, or building a bird nest boxes. You could take that one step further and offer a public tour of your property, or invite the neighbors to check out what you've been doing and perhaps inspire them to be more active stewards. Have every family member select a part of the property to talk about and do a dry run of this public tour with just the family. Seeing the property through the public's eyes is a great way to build passion for the property, and you will enjoy hearing what each member of your family shares. But it's very important that you find balance between work and play. A hard day of work can be fun and provides a sense of accomplishment, but keep in mind, kids have short attention spans, and well, for that matter, so do we. So when you see them losing interest, move on to something else or find a way to make the chore at hand not so tedious. Make sure there's plenty of time for fun so that going to the property doesn't always mean work. And don't forget the s'mores. Hugely important for our family, whether you are, it's a work day, a hike, a picnic, make sure you bring snacks and beverages. And then be sure to recreate on the property, whether it's hunting, fishing, picking wild edibles, camping, hiking, snowshoeing, bird watching, or catching frogs. Time spent enjoying the property helps to build memories and deepen those connections. But the notion of getting kids outdoors is becoming more and more challenging. The disconnection of today's children from the natural world is a growing concern among parents, educators, and mental and physical health professionals throughout the country. The term nature deficit disorder is a condition that was identified by author Richard Louv in his book, Last Child in the Woods, and has been linked to troubling current childhood trends such as the rise in obesity, attention disorders, and depression. In the last 2 decades, childhood has moved indoors. The average American child spends as few as 30 minutes in unstructured outdoor play each day and more than 7 hours each day in front of an electronic screen. Today's children often find their amusement, their adventures in computer games, videos, and television. As a result, children can grow up without knowing much about the natural world or its gifts, and in worst cases, they may even develop a fear of nature and never appreciate the wonderful outdoors that you and I grew up in. So what can we do about it? Encourage exploration and foster curiosity. Take the time to turn over rocks and logs with your children and grandchildren. Follow a set of animal tracks in the snow. Allow them to ask questions. Don't just blow them off by, oh, ask Google or ask Siri, but actually ask them, what do you think the answer is? And then look it up together, or better yet, email or call an expert in the field. Let them know that we're surrounded by experts who are willing to share their knowledge. And then also, when most of us were young, I'm sure we have fond memories of being sent outside and told to come in at dark or to come back in when mom called that supper was ready. But this idea of unsupervised play, and I can appreciate the need to maybe greater supervise children nowadays, but there's a lot of benefit to children who spend time in nature, including reduced stress, an increase in curiosity, creative and problem-solving abilities, and improved physical and emotional health. And never forget to encourage or allow kids to get dirty. One that I've struggled with, but have found ways to embrace, is the idea of technology as a way to engage kids outdoors. So whether it be Google Maps or hunting apps or smartphone apps like bird field guides, or the use of photography, more artistic, creative side, or even your smartphone for taking pictures, all ways that we can bring electronics to the field. Another example is putting up trail cameras. Again, let them decide where they put them. And at least our kids, myself as well, I feel like I'm a kid with this. I love pulling media cards and going through the photos and seeing what I can capture. Another options are geocaching. If you're not familiar with that, I encourage you to look it up. It's just, the main website is www.geocaching.com. But you could create your own private caches on your property. You could use that as a way for them to learn to use a GPS unit, or better yet, a compass in case their GPS unit runs out of batteries. You could develop a scavenger hunt for them, and whether they actually physically collect the object or use that smartphone to take a photo and create a photo journal of the scavenger hunt. And then photo stations are another cool, I think, more creative, artistic side that you might interest your children or grandchildren. And that's just the notion of taking a photo at the same place, in the same location, at different times throughout the year. or perhaps before and after management. And maybe you take one annually or every 3 years after a timber harvest or a prairie planting. Additionally, I find this to be powerful, but nature journals. They include elements of creativity, descriptive writing, observation skills, art and science. And for the student or the journalist, it can actually be their excuse to go outside, their permission. Here's the journal, you have permission to go sit alone, to expand on your skills and to find the calm and the peace that quiet time in nature can provide. Getting started is super easy. Gifting a journal and some colored pencils or nice pens. For us with our kids as they were younger, going to grandma's house, we always started a notebook when we got there, and we kept a list of wildlife sightings for the weekend. And our kids love to keep these lists, phenology type lists of wildlife. Another option is to create some track stations. You see I'm heavy on wildlife ideas here. Create some track stations where you're just encouraging an animal to leave their tracks in the sand by putting down a type of scent or a lure. And if you use something like bobcat urine or fox urine or shellfish paste, you don't want to reward with a food like a bait, but using a scent to attract animals. So they put their leave their footprints. But you can also then make plaster tracks of those animal casts. And you could pair these up with a trail camera to see if you're accurate in your decision on whose tracks those are. So if you make a guess as to who the track is made and then go look at your trail camera cards, you can confirm that. Also just bird watching or nest monitoring if you put nest boxes out. But I can't tell you how many children, urban children especially, that I encounter that have never used a pair of binoculars, don't know how they work, how to use them. So using binoculars, how to use a field guide, how to just sit still and observe. You could collect wild edibles together, and whether that's the fruits of, a hunting or a fishing trip on the property, or morels or raspberries, maple syrup. And finally, I encourage you all to brainstorm ways to increase your family's passion and love for the property. At your next family meeting or gathering, ask everybody, regardless of age, even the 2-year-old that's just starting to find their words, what ideas do they have to increase your family's passion and love for the property, and then work hard to make them happen. Learn about people's interests. Don't be exclusive. You never know who will take an interest in what. You may be surprised. And gather annually and year-round to enjoy seasonal changes together. Again, these traditions that you create now can be very powerful. And finally, remember, it's never too early or too late to get your children and grandchildren connected to your property.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jamie. Seemed like it got faster.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that was about. I apologize, but we got through it.
And to wrap up sort of the presentation portion, and then we'll open it up fully for Q&A. We've got a landowner who's offered to share her story with you all on this topic. So Annie, are you still there and able to unmute?
I am here.
All right.
Yes, I didn't escape.
The mic is yours.
Okay, great. So I am the co-owner of Blue Rock Station, a sustainable living and a farm, a center and a farm. And we do a lot of things here. Our goal when we originally bought the property 27 years ago was to create a place for our family and our friends to come to get away from life. And we always called it our bunker. And then I decided I was going to build a house called an earthship. The architect is out of New Mexico. And I wanted to do something that would make a difference for the region. I didn't really know what that meant. So everything has kind of evolved from that. And we have 40 acres, and 34 of those acres are forest land. We haven't really done much with the forest. We saved that for last, which is where we are right now. And, but we've had thousands of visitors. We stopped counting about, maybe about 15 years ago, but something like 60 or 70,000 people have walked through our living room to hear the story of what we've done and why we've done it. So and we have livestock, and we teach classes on solar installer certification. So we have a lot of different ways that we make a living from our life here. Some of it's from the land, and some of it's from intellectual material from books we've written about what we do, and solar and things like that. So the reality for us is that we're unlucky enough. We have the daughter from hell. And so when our granddaughter was born, we became the parents right away. I mean, immediately. And that has been a fine line to walk in the beginning between our daughter wanting her to get it together and our granddaughter. And so, but we have raised her. She's now 27, the joy of life, and has been pretty much every day. So making up for the child from hell in some ways. We never told her that though. And the thing is, when we used to come here and I was building the house in the summers, and then we lived in the South then, Catlin was insane about this place from day one. You know, she loved snow. She loved wearing purple waders and stomping in mud puddles and getting filthy dirty and all that. But that is not the adult she is. And she's very fair, and she has rosacea. She'd like to be outside, but it's very hard on her. She gets too hot. So this has been a challenge, because we would like and have developed, a property that's quite valuable from where we started. Plus we have intellectual property, which is valuable as well. So we played around with a lot of ideas. We looked at trusts. We've looked at, we have two LLCs. We have the LLC called Blue Rock Station, which for me is really Blue Rock Station, the intellectual material. And they have Warmke, which is my husband's and my last name, Warmke Farm LLC, which is the farm. So that would be the 40 acres that include the woodlands. We also have had about 90 interns throughout the time that we've been doing this last leg of our development. So since about 2007, we've had about 90 interns. And some of them have stayed very connected. About 30 of them have stayed very connected to us. So once we had explored the whole idea of, what to do, someday we're going to die, everybody does. And we didn't do this. We never did anything here like we did in our other life before this. We were always, buying houses and selling houses, and always saying, oh, we can only paint it white because nobody wants a purple room and things like that. But here, everything's been done because we wanted to do it. It was fun. It's engaging. It's investing in others. So that's pretty much the challenge of where we are right now, is we didn't want to sell it. We still don't want to sell it, even though it's quite valuable. So we've had a few sort of monthly meetings with our granddaughter and her husband to discuss, what is it they would like to see happen. And they don't quite want to turn loose of everything. So we made a very thick book for them that has all of our papers in it, the deed to the property, the map of the property, everything that she could possibly want if one of us or both of us got run over. And so she's feeling better about things, but she financially could not handle if tomorrow we died, she's still going to inherit everything, because we haven't decided exactly how to change it, but we would be burdening her. And I think it would make her feel really badly if she were having to sell the property or even a portion of it. She has a lot of attachment. She just doesn't participate, nor has she ever really. So we've decided what to look at. And some of that is to really make sure that we have this division between the intellectual property, Blue Rock Station, and the farm, Warmke Farm. And the other thing that we've been doing in the process of this is to begin to look at Warmkey Farm a lot differently since COVID came. So we have been developing a forest food garden, and we are working with an intern out of Cornell, and we will have 3 different sites for this food garden. And the goal with the food garden is to ensure that we will generate a living wage coming out of the woodlands, and also a couple of other locations on the property that we've developed, like a forest garden that's going to be the size of a normal urban lot, so we can demonstrate how you could create forest garden on a normal urban lot. And so that has become my goal. And then the timber management, because we're not into cutting down trees, but to managing the timber. So, and non-forest timber products, since 34 of the acres is really this amazing woodland. We're also looking at climate adaptation and how we're going to manage the woodland in that way, because we see that as the future of how this land could live on. It may be we get far enough in that there could be enough revenue that could support Catlin owning the property, but we think it's going to be more like we leave her the intellectual property and a car and whatever else we see of value. Jay has an amazing comic book collection from when he was young that's worth a lot of money, and we're going to sell some of that off in this next year, but leave back maybe some of the things we think will be super valuable. And then we've explored through an advisory group of our former interns. They meet twice a year with us, and we go over everything we do on the land, everything we're doing with our business. We show our profit and loss statement. We just lay it all on the table. And they've been very helpful to us. But we've identified that some of them are people who will not inherit wealth. And they also, they do have good jobs, but they're not going to have, probably not for a while anyway, the ability to buy land or have their own home. So we're thinking that maybe we will set up something that they would be, about 5 of them would control the property and benefit from whatever revenues are generated from the property. And part of our goal with the advisory group was to see how would they all work together, because most of them only knew each other from coming here for Yule, or because we have events where only the interns come. We have a goat stock, which is our annual reunion for interns. And so they got to know each other that way, but want to see how they would work together. And we're really leaning towards setting up some kind of legal structure that they would then receive the property well ahead. We might just live on the land, until we can't, or we die, whichever comes first. So it's not exactly the traditional model, but the goal, it's really who we are in our business model, and that is to invest in others. And so by doing this, we will have taken care of our granddaughter and making sure she has what she needs, but also we have other people we love and feel they have so much ownership and so much care for this place, almost as much as we do. So that's our plan right now. And we think by the end of the year, we'll have something formally in place.
That's an incredible story. And you had one question in the chat. Was it your granddaughter or daughter who at first liked the property?
It's our granddaughter. We bought it in the week she was born. So she's always loved the property. I'm sure my daughter did too, but that sometimes you don't get the children you'd like to have. And so it's just the way it is. We loved her until we couldn't handle it anymore. And we got Catlin. So
fantastic. So I think now's the time to open up both the chat window and the general ability to unmute. So please feel free to unmute or raise your hand, or however you prefer to do it in Zoom, and ask a question of any of our 4 speakers.
one question, and this is more, let me see if I can take myself and put on video. There we are. Hi.
Hello.
Walking the property and, without having a surveyor or somebody come out, I have my survey. I had someone say that, what they did is walk and check their property lines or whatever. And I'm just curious, is there an app? I mean, I've tried before to just go off of my Google Maps and follow the white lines, and I know where the pins are and stuff, but like have not put my hands on all of them, which is my goal. And so I didn't know if there was an app or something that somebody might be able to share about that.
Well, I don't know about an app. We have been really careful to mark all of, to keep in place all of the markers that are in the corners. But another thing that we have done is we have worked with a group called Rural Action, who did a forest management plan for us, and they were able to re-identify the markers for us. And now we have a grant from NRCS or NCRS, I can never remember which it is, and the natural resource people, and we're going to sort of up our game with the forest management plan to include forest gardening and so forth. And so I think there are ways to figure that out. And if there was an app, that would be great, but I don't know what it is. We've tried to find one, but it didn't work.
There are a couple coming in on the chat, Annie. So if you check that, Avenza and on X Hunt. So I'll check that. I know, yeah, I've tried my best, and we did have just an initial forest plan made up that I'm not happy with. That was just, somebody came on and did. So we'll work on that. And we rent out to deer hunters. But as far as I don't know, just touching the four corners, it's been kind of on my mind, and I don't get lost in the woods. I just am not hitting the marks that I need to. So I'll try those other ones. Thanks.
And sometimes it depends too, when you had a recent sort of professional survey done, we discovered at a different property, not the one we live on now, that things are a little off, and we had them kind of properly surveyed and through that process got to touch the four corners, but that does cost money.
Yeah. And I'm not adverse to that. It's just not where I want to spend my money right away.
Yeah.
And there's actually more than the four corners, right? Because there's the juts and all of that. And the ones I found are intact. That's not a problem. And it's like sometimes the old poplar stump or the dead cherry tree that I'm not finding. And of course, obviously the invasives get in the way too. So, but I'll try those. Thanks.
Yeah, and if your property is marked with rebar, you could try a metal detector too. I've heard of landowners going out in the woods with a metal detector.
We borrowed one from a friend, but the arm broke off, and so I haven't taken it out yet. Thanks.
Other questions or comments?
A question for Marla, I think. So this question of the two questions, how do you want the land to be used, or who do you want to own it? I'm wondering whether you've seen any interest expressed or by landowners on navigating, perhaps as an alternative to conservation easements or transferring land to local land trusts, whether you're seeing interest in navigating donating or transferring land to local tribes at all, whether that's something that you're seeing crop up as an area of interest among landowners.
Yeah, that's interesting. That has not come up with the research that we did in the Northeast. But certainly I think that there are probably some people that are interested in doing that. I haven't seen that directly. I'm part of I have a lot of different projects going, but one of them is looking at Forest Service data and ownership change, and there's nothing finalized there, but we're trying to understand ownership change and not necessarily donation or related to legacy planning, but I did see in some of that transition some land going from family forest owner to tribal, and this is national data. But it hasn't come up in the surveys that I've done, but it certainly is a possibility.
I'm working with somebody right now because I do consulting. I didn't talk about that, but I do consulting with primarily women in agriculture around how to make a living. And I'm working with somebody out of North Carolina who's on what they call unceded land. And that person could really benefit from somebody giving them some land. They're doing amazing work with transgender people and trying to create food, sovereignty and not deserts and things like that. But there is a need. People have a need if somebody's thinking about maybe offering property.
And I would suggest that if you are thinking about donating to a conservation organization or a town or a tribe, make sure you speak to those people ahead of time. Make sure that it's a gift that they can receive. I know that a lot of people, some people want to donate their land to the university, which is fine. The university will certainly take it, but they will probably sell it. So it's a good idea to make sure that even if they do accept it, they're going to continue to manage it in a way that meets what you wish for the property, because that's not always the case.
And Marcella, did you want some more details? Marcella asked about leaving land to towns or tribes, and if there's any information that would be helpful. Where are you located? What state?
I'm in Massachusetts.
Oh, okay.
And I know I've got
Marla,
a good resource with Paul and Mass Woods. So, that's helpful. But as far as giving to the town, I know other people have done so, but sometimes the town does not want to accept the land, and that gets complicated too. It depends on who the select board is and what their land preservation leanings are.
Yep.
It's sometimes helpful if there can be a financial account that goes along with the land, because like I talked about in my presentation, it costs money to own land. So sometimes towns or organizations are not in a financial position to be able to manage it. So if there's some money that goes along with it, that could maybe go towards keeping it the way that you want to see it kept into the future.
Mm-hmm. And Starlet asked a specific question. Do you have to own land outright? Can you have a loan on the land before it can be given to a land trust or put into a conservation easement?
I don't know the answer to that. I would assume.
I don't know the answer to that question.
I don't see
how. Sorry, go ahead, Jennifer.
Hey, if you have debt against it, how can you? It's not logical. It doesn't mean it's not possible, but you don't own it yet. Maybe you never really own it. That's sometimes.
Yeah, I didn't sound logical to me, Annie, but I had heard something. And then also, when people, well, just put your, you want to do this, put your property into easement. And I'm like, not everybody can do that at this specific part of their journey. So I just didn't know if it's, we'd have to leave money to cover it, I would think. And there might, there probably is money to cover it at that point, but okay. And then the last question, Annie, if you could put in the link to your farm, that would be cool.
Okay. And then I also wanted to say one thing, which I am participating in a program called, I wrote it down, wait, because I forgot what I'm always forgetting, Give a Tree. And they're an international group and they're buying they're paying for half the cost of every tree that I plant for my forest garden. And then they're promoting it. And if that's something that women are interested in, I highly suggest you get in touch with them because they're out of Spain, but they're doing amazing work for promoting food forests. So I'll put my contact here.
And
And
I'll
would
put,
you mind repeating that organization you cut out, at least in my computer, you cut it. I didn't hear what you said.
It's called Give a Tree.
Thank
They
you.
have a book page. They have a website.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
yep, and I'll resend right here in the chat window. Here's where I've been collecting all of these things from the chat window, and we'll host this for the foreseeable future on Google Drive. And one more comment on the loan issue with conservation easements too. Depending on the land, there's always an option that a land trust may want to actually buy property, or some entity may want to buy it and protect it, particularly if it connects to parcels that they're interested in or is important for other reasons, wildlife, etc. It's not uncommon for purchases to be made so anyway, talking to the regional land trusts and folks that administer those is always worth a shot. I saw a hand up. Is it Davida?
That's me, yes. I actually wrote a private message to Marcella on the town that I live in now. We have property in Vermont, but we're in Massachusetts now, has a very active conservation trust. And that's exactly what happens is they buy land, often with either grants and funding or support of the town, and then either develop trails, put it in conservation. Sometimes they take parcels of it and resell it, depending on how it was donated or given. So that is something that happens in many towns here.
Yeah, and that in that sense, they'd pay off the loan the same way, somebody buying your house essentially pays off the rest of your mortgage.
Right.
Hi, this is Jennifer Teagarden. I work for the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, and I just wanted to mention a couple programs that we have if we have any Minnesota landowners on here. We do have what's called Forest Legacy or Conservation Easement Program. We target specific lands, so not all lands will be enrolled in conservation easement, but we have another program called the Sustainable Forest Incentive Act. And people can enroll in that, and you get yearly payments to not develop your land. And people can sign up for different amounts of time. There's an 8-year covenant, a 20-year covenant, and then a 50-year covenant. So if people are concerned about, I don't really have the money to give away my land for a conservation easement, that's a great program that I recommend people enrolling in. So if you have a 50-year covenant, whatever land that you roll in, you cannot develop it for 50 years, or if you do, there's a penalty. So again, check, if you are from Minnesota, reach out to a Minnesota DNR forester.
Awesome, thank you.
Jennifer, what's the name of that program again? Just curious.
Sorry, I'm muted because I have a plane flying by. It's the Sustainable Forest Incentive Act. We do have 2 different programs. That one tends to be for landowners in northern Minnesota. Other people enroll in what's called the 2C forest land. That's more common for southern Minnesota. That gives you a tax break. Versus the Sustainable Forest Incentive Act, you get annual payments. And then I mentioned we have the Forest Legacy program, and I can send out or get you links to those right now after I'm done talking.
Right, and I'll add to that. So the most common easements are in perpetuity easements, but the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service has 30-year term easements available for forested land for people who want to, let's see, it's protect endangered or threatened species, improve biological diversity, or for climate change. Unfortunately, it's not available in every state. There are 12 states that have funding from this NRCS program. And this is some research that Paul and I were just actually trying to get published now and seeing how much interest there would be in landowners having for shorter term easements. So basically allowing people to put their land to protect their land from development of like residential or commercial use, but maybe not for the length of time that might tie their kids' hands, but just until they have a chance, to think a little bit more about what they want in the future. And we found that that forest owners were equally interested in the term easements as the permanent easements. And we found that to be really interesting, and have been sort of promoting the need for more options for family forest owners who want to protect their land without necessarily having requirements for forest management or other things. And the other thing that easements, the other reason why easements are different is because once you sign up for them, you're required to stay in them. Whereas things like current use or other programs, you can opt out. So that can meet some people's needs and their goals and what they want to do with their land to protect their forested land. And some people could be turned off by that as well. So we're just really trying to promote more options for people, because people have lots of different goals. And as Jennifer said, when we start talking about fairness and fair versus equal, that time frame and sort of the requirement might come up as well.
Yeah, I had a private message, Annie, asking for links to the Give a Tree program. I wasn't able to find it on my own online, so I might ask you to share that. Any other questions? We're getting close to the top of the hour. Amanda and Lenora, do you have a link to where the recordings are kept, or is that just something you'll email around?
We'll email that after the webinar is done. It'll take a day or two, but we'll send it out to everybody who registers.
Perfect, thank you. Any last questions? Okay, well, we'll close about 5 minutes early, and thank you again, clap or Zoom virtual clap, to all of our amazing women who presented today and shared their resources and stories. It's given me lots and lots of food for thought, and I'm sure it has for everybody else. So have a wonderful rest of your weeks, everybody.